This is Auteur Detour, wherein three film lovers travel through the filmographies of cinema's most important directors in hopes of finding a greater understanding on the other side.
Hello and welcome back to Auteur Detour. I'm Chris Balaza. With me as always is Ian Hinckley.
Hi!
Oh wow. Oh wow. All right. And of course Travis White.
Good morning.
I was hoping somebody would do that.
All the way.
I was so hoping somebody would do that. Yes, the bat voice. So we were talking today about Batman Begins, of course. We couldn't intuit that. So anyway, I missed you guys. It's been too long since we recorded. This is great. Batman Begins.
They don't know that. This is coming out a week after the last episode.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's been a whole week. I missed you guys. Anyway, Batman Begins.
Let's Batman Begins the podcast.
Let's begin this podcast. Batman Begins, guys. Released in 2005 is Christopher Nolan's fourth feature film and the first part of Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy. The film opens with Bruce Wayne traveling the world, still struggling years later with the anger and guilt of his parents' murder in an attempt to better understand the criminal mind. He's confronted by the mysterious Ducard, Ra's al Ghul, and the League of Shadows, who train him to fight in hopes of recruiting him to carry out their ultimate coup, the destruction of Gotham City. Bruce politely declines their invitation by burning their house down, then finally returns to Gotham City. So Bruce eventually takes up the familiar cape and cowl as Gotham's masked crime fighter. The central struggle of the film revolves around a fear toxin that the Scarecrow and the League of Shadows plan to release into Gotham's water supply and subsequently vaporize, resulting in mass hysteria, widespread chaos, and Gotham City's downfall. Teaming up with Gotham PD's Sergeant Gordon, Batman eventually saves the city, dismantles the League of Shadows, and takes his first steps toward the personal redemption he spent his entire life chasing. So, Batman Begins. What'd you think, guys?
I love it. I love it. Travis, do you love it?
The first time I saw this movie, I was like with a group of guys. I was actually studying abroad, and we all went and saw it. It was like the big American movie that was sort of like going to like have a little taste of America together. And we came out of the theater, and all the guys were like kind of bouncing up and down, and they were like really excited about it. And they were like, "That was amazing!" And like they looked at me like, "Right?" Like, and I was just like, really? Like, was it that good? Like, I just thought it was so like clunky, and like some of the dialogue stuff just like stuck so hard in my craw. The like finders keepers, like kind of screenplay writing 101 stuff where you say a line and then you bring it back later. Like that stuff just, we'll get into it. But when he says like what?
Nice coat.
Yeah, I mean that's literally the worst moment of the film. Almost derails the entire movie in my mind. But like,
is it the worst Nolan moment in all of Nolan's filmography?
Well, it's just in that moment, which is such an incredible scene, and then to have that line, and it makes me wonder if like they sent Warner Brothers was like, this is your like snappy line guy, because the humor in all the other movies is so much more organic, and not to say that they're like laugh riots, right. But I just mean the humor that they allow, the kind of James Bondish kind of like humor is so much more natural or less obnoxious in the other films. Anyway, the point is, I didn't get it. I thought it had some great stuff in it, and I loved Christian Bale, but it as a whole, it just didn't work for me. But I kept going back to it to be like, oh, like that one scene is so cool. Let me watch it again. And I got so into like the music of it, like the visual rhythms of it, that I just kept going back again and again and again, and I ended up watching this movie like 50 times or something, and I was able like at that time to watch it and just completely ignore the flaws and just like kind of like take in all the beauty of the movie, the incredible performance of Christian Bale. One of my favorite performances of his, even though it's so kind of understated in a way.
Yeah, we'll definitely get into his performance.
So the bottom line is, I love it. It's one of my favorite Christopher Nolan movies. It's definitely like maybe the best superhero movies. It's incredibly uneven, and I think it's interesting to look at what he's accomplishing, and at the same time look at these kind of growing pains that he's experiencing as he's like being catapulted into like, $100 million blockbuster kind of world. So,
Right.
so in some ways I have mixed feelings about the movies. There's a lot of flaws, but in some ways
That's
just love
funny.
it. Yeah.
I want to get yours, Chris, but I'll just elaborate because all I said was I love it.
Yeah.
Because I was Travis's. I mean, I wasn't there, but I was your friend bouncing up and down when I got out of the movie. Like, I can't remember right now why I was so excited for this movie, because obviously I liked Christopher Nolan a lot, but I didn't like Insomnia at the time. And I also like was off of Batman at the time, So for whatever reason, I was like way excited to go see this movie, and I think I saw it, if not opening night, then I mean, if not a midnight screening, then definitely opening night with a group of people. And I remember feeling like this, like, oh, he broke something new. I remember feeling that like energy watching it just from that initial sort of whatever it is 15 minutes of sort of exposition prologue, kind of, where it's like goes to him in Asia and all that stuff, and it's just like I was just like, oh, like this isn't superhero movies, like now it is. But I remember at the time being like, holy shit, he like changed it. Like he made it new, and it was so exciting to me, and I was on board from the beginning. Like later on I've watched it so many times like you have, and I still love it just as much, but like nothing compares to that initial watch to me, where I was just like, this fucking movie is like so fresh and so good. And I loved every character and every actor that he chose, besides maybe a couple, but I mean, it was just such a stacked cast. And every time, like, 40 minutes into the movie, Morgan Freeman comes in or whatever. You're like, what the fuck?
When I watched that last night, I like gave a little applause. Like
I
so many Marvel movies now, like bring in like Michael Douglas, or they'll bring in some like Glenn Close or something like that, and they'll give them like some like maybe big on paper role that doesn't suit them at all, that doesn't really play to their strengths, or
Right.
and they barely make an impression. And when Morgan Freeman shows up and he's just making his little remarks, like kind of on the sidelines of the movie, it's so powerful, and he's so great in the movie. And
Yeah.
I think, the cast is incredible. I think Katie Holmes almost gets like a bad rap because I think she does a fine job. And I think that
I've given her a bad rap, and like watching it the other night, I was like, she's fine. Like I'm only giving her shit because she's not a good actress, but like she's good in this movie. She's fine.
Deliver lines such as, "This is your true mask. Your real face is the one villains now fear." Like she has to say stuff like that. You try saying that and coming off better than Katie Holmes, and look half as good doing it.
Chris, what was your history, and how much do you like or dislike this movie?
Yeah, I resonate with more your initial experience, Ian, but then it kind of changes a little bit. So, of course, me, like every other American boy that was born in the 80s, or basically ever, because Batman's been around as an iconic figure as long as time has existed, it seems like, was super excited for this movie. I saw it in the theater right as it came out, and then I remember leaving like, finally, like the real Batman that I loved Tim Burton's version. I hated Schumacher. I really I loved the stylized version of Burton that's very much its own world and very much like its own thing, but Schumacher took it to a whole nother level of camp and silliness that I never have been on board with. I appreciate that it exists because it's distinctive from every other portrayal of Batman, and it has these harkens to the Bob Kane kind of colorful silliness, but it still lacks the Adam West like true translation of a comic book strip, and it left me with this weird like, what the fuck was this?
Yeah.
So I didn't even watch, admittedly, the very, very last one. It was Batman and Robin, I think, I just like, you know what? I'm gonna pass on this.
Wow.
I've never seen it all the way through. I've only seen it.
No way.
Yeah.
That's insane to me.
And I know you have your feelings. I know you guys, obviously I like them or like things about them more than I do. So when this movie was announced and finally came out, I was so on board. I was like, there's Christian Bale, all these other people. And honestly, I didn't know anything about it. Like I do, I try to enter a movie as blind as I can. So I think I was one, I really loved that, again, Batman is told almost like realistically, like it can't possibly be realistic, but is like grounded of a world and like as nuanced of a world as Christopher Nolan can create, right? Rather than it's a world where Batman stands out. And I think Nolan said that when he was making it. The Burton is really stylized and kind of idiosyncratic, but he wanted to create a world that's kind of grounded wherein the figure of Batman actually stands out more than everything else. You know, like he's weird. The people who see him are like, what the hell is this? Rather than like a world where a Joker can just like turn into this weird clown guy, and other people are, you know, created where a Batman figure is less maybe unique, less like eye-catching than in previous iterations. So again, I left the movie with an awesome feeling. I was stoked about it. And I think this time I watched it, I maybe have seen it one other time prior to this. So this isn't a film that's really like embedded into my consciousness. So a lot of it was kind of like watching it again, having revisited it this time. And I think maybe it's due to the fact that I'm a little more you know, just familiar with Batman, that the story now has been, you know, embedded in our like cultural psyche for so long. I was less taken by it this time for a couple different reasons, and I can ignore some of the more obvious, not, you know, contrivances in the plot and silly, absolutely ridiculous things that come up that I'm like, okay, I'll give you that. Fine, we got to move the plot along, whatever. But I liked it a lot less this time, and for maybe reasons I'll get into shortly. But I still loved and was kind of blown away by the fact that there's so many different characters, so many different villains. Like, you think it's going to be about the Scarecrow, and he's really not like a main villain. There's no central villain unless you really want to call, you know, the Ra's al Ghul character who's pulling all the strings, but even he takes on multiple faces in the film too, right? So I like the spread of the cast. Like you guys said, the cast is phenomenal. You couldn't have cast virtually anyone better in any role, with maybe an exception or two. I liked it. I didn't love it like I love some of his other films, but I think we can talk more about what we did and didn't love in greater detail. But again, it's a nice medium. It's a solid, like solid medium for me.
B for Batman. You know, I want to go to something you said, Chris. I mean, I think awesome is the perfect word for this. The reverence with which he treats the figure of Batman, and like the character of, you know, when you said like, yeah, Ra's al Ghul really doesn't feel like the central villain in a way, because he's barely in the movie, and he's in the beginning and then he's in the very end, but there's a whole middle stretch where there is no villain, right? It's really just about Bruce Wayne's journey. And that is a really interesting story, and the training and stuff like that. And like, you know, it is crazy that this was the first time this has ever been, you know, shown in a movie. Like, what happened between like him, like his parents getting shot, and him like becoming like the world's greatest martial artist, flying like one man SEAL Team 6, you know? Like what's that story? And that is really interesting. And but the way the movie like shows Batman in this, like it is so powerful and so like kind of scary and like awe-inspiring, and even the character of Bruce Wayne like doesn't quite have that magnitude unless he's in the suit, you know. And when he finally puts it all together and then is in the suit and he comes on screen, you're just like, oh my god, it's really kind of like jaw-dropping. And that's why when he says nice coat in the middle of that first sequence when you meet him, it's so disappointing or upsetting. But also when he first goes out with just like a ski mask and stuff and some like, you know, harnesses, it's not filmed the same way with the same kind of like, the music isn't hitting the same way, right? It's just like, he's just a guy in a ski mask. And then the difference of willing yourself to be this like total, like larger than life kind of thing is really underscored in the cinematography and the music. And then, wait, I just want to say, no other Marvel movie, you know, treats any of their characters with like that kind of like reverence and kind of awe. And I think the whole superhero genre is like weaker for that. And like, you know, what's his name's films like thematically do? Snyder, what's his name?
Zack Snyder.
Zack Snyder, like, but he films them, they're an Acura in a car commercial. You know what I mean? There's just like this like digital camera like zooming around them in this kind of like dull kind of way. Christopher Nolan really was onto something with this, and it's a shame that it kind of it was so influential for a minute, and it's just sort of been, I don't know. Anyway, go ahead.
Well, just because I want to go back to the coat line, because just so that we don't have to keep coming back to it like later on in this talk, but I do think it did make me think about how we talked about how Nolan has these sort of like in jokes for himself in a weird way. Like, I mean, it's such a theme of his, like we've talked about, like the putting on the suit to become the man that you want to be. And like, that's like a moment where Batman like knows what he did. And like, it's
Absolutely.
like a, you know, it's a metaphorical moment. Like it's very fucking unsubtle, but it's like on the fucking nose. But it is like a moment of that. And Nolan does love to like have these sort of, okay, bye Travis. Sorry, Travis just left. No, Christopher Nolan does love to have these sort of jokes that he's making for himself. Obviously, that one's not funny, but like
I didn't feel like it was like that. I thought it was just like cheesy, like kind of like residual like 1990s blockbuster joke line kind of writing, and I really felt like either David Ayer was putting it in. He's the screenwriter who was like Hollywood's comic book guy who wrote like a million comic book movies,
and he still is, right?
And,
isn't he doing like
he did Blade, and he's doing something now, I'm sure. Like, but
I think he does like write the Snyder ones.
But
too.
doesn't this feel like those moments, like they feel very 90s? You said this movie was so forward thinking, but those moments are so clunky and old fashioned and don't fit the tone of Nolan's film, and it makes me feel like they were not his hand.
Well, they feel to me like not even 90s, but earlier than that. If you remember, I mean, you guys are probably big comic book fans like me too, but that's kind of one of those recurring things is like you start off with a line and then they use the line. Like there's at least 3 or 4 different like revenge, like repeated the line like, you should have minded your surroundings. You never learned to mind your surroundings.
That's the worst one.
Well, and then there's like the, didn't you get the memo? Or the, look, it's really complicated and all, but you know, there's all the like, that comes back. But there's that's so a trope of old comic books too, that I'm like, is he trying to like, sort of, again, he's reworked this world in such that he's sort of deviated from the traditional comic book presentation of it, and I would hope that he had kept that alive with the dialogue, but he kind of, as I interpreted it, kind of circled that back into the movie. Like, don't forget, this is kind of a comic book.
We are coming off of the movies that have like George Clooney using a bat, credit card and being like, fucking making jokes like that, or like chicks dig the car, like the fucking Val Kilmer one is like it's the car, right? Chicks dig the car.
I mean, but that's no different, or like that's only like a tiny bit removed from I gotta get me one of those. And again, it doesn't feel like a Nolan thing. It really feels
that's what I mean.
It's coming from somewhere. It's coming from somewhere else, and
I feel like you're right.
It's not good, and I'm glad that they ditched it in the other movies. And coming back to the dialogue, again, they're really, even the lines that feel more like Nolan, and that feel more like the other movies in this trilogy, because this is like the first of a trilogy, and it feels the most different out of any of the 3.
It is the first of a trilogy,
and
but it's also like a continuation of a series. I mean, it's like a revamp of it.
What I'm saying is the dialogue. He is going for this kind of like operatic dialogue that sort of like people speak in kind of like cone, kind of this quality, and that is not in the earlier Batman movies, or at least not to the degree that it is in this one. And it feels in this so stale when Liam Neeson is jumping out with a sword, going, "You have to become an idea." It's like so kind of like, what are you talking about? Or like the Scarecrow being like, "You have nothing to fear but fear itself." It just like, it sounds like they're reading greeting cards to you. But then compare that to The Dark Knight, which was co-written by, I guess, Christopher Nolan's brother. And it has the same kind of dialogue, but it's so memorable and it's so iconic. Like the Joker's lines, what doesn't kill you makes you stranger. And of course, either die a hero or live long enough to see yourself become the villain. Like it's just like a tiny, like one click of a dial away, but it's so much more powerful and it's so much more effective. And in this one, again, I think they were going for something that they didn't quite nail, and I think they were being conservative in the way that they were leaning on 90s action movies tropes. But I think that where they got to was a very comic booky kind of like, again, like operatic, over the top kind of dialogue that they could still deliver kind of semi-believably because of the quality of the acting. But anyway.
I mean, you're right about that. Like the Dark Knight's version, which is, live long enough to become the villain line or whatever, which is like a brilliant sort of bit of Nolan-ism, right? It's this like simply stated sort of but very complex, but also not that as complex as it sounds.
And probably not even
sort
true,
of thing.
really.
And not
But,
true,
you know.
exactly. But it's like he's great at doing these things where
Yeah.
it's like he makes you think like, holy shit, that's profound. And then like if you give it like one extra minute of thought, you're like, well, it's not that profound, but like it feels profound in his universe, right? But like the worst, it's the same. It's not any different than like you said, like you have to become an idea, like which is the worst delivery of any line.
He's trying.
You know?
He's trying. No, there's some lines. There's some lines that I love in this movie because of how Christian Bale delivers them. And then when you think about what he said, you're like, dude, he's. This is like an Oscar-worthy performance, like
From Christian Bale.
From Christian Bale, because the stuff that he has to deliver and make sound good is really difficult. And there's only one. Well, so are we done talking about the dialogue? Do we kind of agree it's like the weakest part of the movie? Like, what do we think?
So
movie?
before we move off of it, I do want to say like it's never bothered me having this conversation. Like I can agree, it's the growing pains that you're talking about between like trying to move into this giant blockbuster thing where he still has to kind of like serve the studios or whatever, and maybe that's what it is. But it's never been something that like, besides things like nice coat and like you said, the, mind your surroundings at the end, like bullshit, like that just also feels like
stuff.
It's bad, but it also like, it's never, it's never been an issue for me. But I agree that like compared to
Memento.
Don't judge me. I liked it.
Compared to any other film ever made. But that's the thing. The quality of the filmmaking is so strong, and the quality of the script, like I said, it feels like, screenwriting 101. It's like somebody's like first attempt at like, oh, you should like do a line early on and then repeat it like for like, later. Like, I'll do it 100 times, like.
Well, and he tends to respect the audience a little bit more than he does here. Like I'm thinking of the scene where the monorail is about to hit the thing, and the guy in the chain in the command center is like, "It's gonna blow," blah 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 blah, and he's explaining to us exactly what was already directly explained to us. We know
that guy loves.
If it reaches Wayne Tower, it's gonna blow up.
They cut back to him 10 times, and every time he's like, "It's gonna blow," and then the last time when it doesn't blow, they cut back to him and he just goes, "Ah," and he
right. Well, it just
I
feels
hate
like
that
the corporate heads were like, you know what, people are kind of dummies. They're not going to get your memento, so we're going to have to dumb it down for some people. And it feels like there was a lot more meddling in the script than there would have otherwise been.
That's exactly how it feels. It feels like they're not quite sure, like as confident in what they're going for as they maybe are in The Dark Knight, where they just kind of like let loose.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, also, Nolan was still not a completely proven commodity.
Right.
Of
course
it's
not
like,
this level.
Sure.
Yeah. That's sure.
So it makes sense. But I know you wanted to get into Christian Bale and the acting, but before we move on,
when you say I want to get into Christian Bale, let's be clear.
Let's be clear about something. We all do. Just kidding. But I do want to like, because we can talk about all of the acting in this movie. But first, I want to just like ask you guys, because this is like a Nolan series that we're doing. Like, what was the part of this that felt the most Nolan to you? Like watching this movie, to me it was the first part before the action of the movie starts and he becomes Batman, and it's all of that sort of prologue that's not, it's like that all feels so Christopher Nolan to me, where it's like moving through time without cuts, you know what I mean, just sort of like fading into a new time. And like that felt like he opened the movie with like most of the country not knowing who he was, doing full Christopher Nolan. Like that's a bold fucking move, and I really appreciated that.
Yeah, no, he was like we've talked about. I mean, he was kind of like fully formed in his like filmmaker identity, like out of the gate, and he is so confident and so bold. And I think that just the theme of like willing yourself into this kind of like perfect person, or like being like I think that is like
in this movie.
The most Nolan theme of like Batman is like a perfect Nolan character, and focusing on that journey of creation, like self-creation, is what makes this one like the most Christopher Nolan-y to me.
I think stylistically too, I mean, I remember watching this kind of being mildly disoriented because I wasn't as familiar with Christopher Nolan's style. He only uses straight cuts, right? Like there's never any other transition. So sometimes
there's a dissolve. There's some crazy, there's one dissolve It's when he's like, "Tell me, Bruce, why could you not get revenge or whatever?" And it dissolves. I think that's the only dissolve. But the cutting is intense. There's like not jump cuts technically, but cuts that like feel like jump cuts.
Right.
There's cutting like almost right on the edge of dialogue to completely different scenes. I mean, the hard editing in this film is so. I mean, I'm a nerd, so I'll say thrilling. Like, I love the editing in this film. When Gordon goes, "Oh, just some nut," and then it's like a neck breaking edit to the next sequence. I love that stuff, I mean, this is one of the reasons Nolan movies like are so great to rewatch. Like I said, I didn't get it all the first time, but you watch it again, and there's these little shots that last like 2 or 3 seconds. That have like so many like little visual kind of clues and ideas and stuff like that in them. I'm thinking of Bruce Wayne drinking his orange juice on the floor with bare feet, like taking notes on like all the stuff around the city when the bat flies in. Like that shot, which is like can't last more than 2-3 seconds, is one of my favorite shots in the movie now.
Yeah, it's really interesting that he does sort of like up until he is the Batman, even through when he's like wearing the fucking ski mask or whatever, like you said, like all of that whole, how long is that in the movie? It's a long time, right?
He doesn't show up as Batman until like 45 minutes,
halfway,
exactly.
Like,
so it's like that whole time, which the more you watch this movie, the more you realize how slow it is, like how slow the movie it is. It's like equally slow and moving at breakneck speed. Like it's weird how like the dichotomy of that, where it's like he goes from being a little kid watching his parents die to burning down a fucking, it's not Tibet, right? It's some made up place.
I don't think it's described.
Yeah, exactly. But like, you know, a whole thing, having the whole do card thing to be him being Batman. It's like, it does take a long time before like any real action happens besides the do card stuff. But like, it's so much fucking
storytelling,
like
so much story happens, so much.
That's what I'm saying.
He's
like
doing robberies, he's stealing guavas and giving them to children.
And you're also learning about Falcone. You're learning about Rachel Dawes. You're learning about fucking Alfred. Like everything is like told in this 45-minute fucking breakneck speed of storytelling. That like it doesn't make it feel like this is a Batman movie that has no action. You know what I mean?
Right.
This was the first time I think in a superhero, especially origin movie, where I didn't mind not seeing the actual final superhero in their costume at all. I didn't even notice, honestly. I'm just following along like this movie, you know? Like, you know, I remember watching the Tobey Maguire first Spider-Man with Sam Raimi, like, just be Spider-Man. Where's the spider suit? Come on, yeah. You know, let's get to it. Or, you know, even Michael Keaton, who becomes Batman a lot sooner, obviously. Like, you see it, like, right there almost. But this was a movie where, again, it's unfolding and you're just along for the ride, and I'm not even anxiously anticipating seeing Batman. I just want to see how this whole thing unfolds, you know? The journey there is arguably more entertaining and interesting than the final form Batman, which also has a great payoff.
The talking about what makes it Nolan, early on in the film when he's in prison, talking to some old guy in the line getting his like slop for the day, and then he's attacked by a giant, you know, Mongolian brute, and the guy's like, "You're in hell, little man." Like, you cannot tell what that guy says. And that is like, I think, the first good example of like Christopher Nolan does not care if you can hear the dialogue in his movie.
Yeah, that's funny.
So it took me like a couple watches to even tell what he was saying, and now I'm just used to it. Now I like don't even care. And you know, another thing that we've talked about is the way, going back to following, Christopher Nolan's so good at like honing in on these characters, living their kind of like weird little lives. Always like adjacent to like crime and kind of stuff that's bigger than them. And he's not really good at, you know, realistically kind of portraying like these are criminal people, or like it seems like anything outside of like an obsessive nerd in their own world or their own professional setting, anything outside of that milieu is like very hard for him to like convincingly portray. All the rich people stuff in this movie, all the gangster stuff in this movie is so kind of like vague and half-assed. Like, Falcone is not believable or scary. Judge Faden just like being grumpy on the stand, and that's supposed to be like, oh, this is an evil judge. Like, none of that really registers at all. Like they're acting cartoonish, but at the same time, not in a fun, like in a convincing way. It's just sort of like, do you know what I'm talking about?
Well,
Like
but
the world is
I
like
do-
when it gets to the edge, like beyond like kind of Batman's immediate world, it all kind of like dissolves a little bit or like feels weak, and that's a weakness that he kind of carries over into this film, I think.
I get what you're saying. I think that in this movie, sorry, do you want to say something, Chris? I saw you. Go ahead.
No, please go ahead. I want to follow up with this, but yeah, I'd like to hear what you have to say.
Well, I was just gonna say, at least in this movie, because of the story that it's telling of like, he's not the world's greatest detective in this movie. Like, he's spiraling about what he even is trying to do, right? He's kind of like a ninja brute in a weird way that just wants to like take everybody down. And like, you know, you think that Falcone is who he's going after, but Falcone's not really that scary. And then the Scarecrow is actually kind of scary, but like still not really a villain. And it's like, that's all part of like Bruce Wayne's journey.
I'm talking about just like,
discovering,
an unconvincingly drawn world. I'm not talking
I
about.
get that's
like,
what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is that like because of the structure
works.
of this movie, it works for me. Like
Yeah.
it's not.
It's easy to ignore.
It's not like,
I agree. It's
Yeah,
one of my
yeah.
flaws that I've like been able to kind of put aside. This is the first time I've watched this movie in a while, so I was able to. Those little glaring things
Yeah,
kind of
yeah.
stuck out to me more.
Yeah. I you know, to that point, I had a larger point that kind of touches on what you guys were talking about. But one of the issues that I have with this movie, and it's not just this movie, it's literally any superhero movie at all, because, you know, big bad guy, big bad guy, but, you know, the urge to fight the criminals of Gotham by Batman, it's just more the systemic power structures that actually cause the people to become criminals in the first place. It remains entirely uninterrogated, right? And so in Gotham, it's basically this feeling that criminals are born. They're not created, really. Batman's one of the only people who feels like they have this, they start one place and you understand why their arc has trajected them to the place where they are. Whereas most criminals, they're just bad. Like either like Flats, he's just a bad guy. This guy's a bad guy. Falcone's a bad guy. And, you know, we don't really know why, or we see these, you know, maybe structures in place, and there's this sort of benevolent, quote, benevolent, you know, rich man in that, you know, Bruce Wayne's dad, but he's not at all interested in what makes criminals or why these things happen. He has all the money and the resources to do so, but like, it's whatever. Well, it's just going to go around punching bad guys and taking out the individuals, you know?
Well,
and so
But
I
that's
think
Rachel
part of it
Dawes'
has to
thing,
do
right?
with,
Isn't that
well,
like Rachel Dawes' whole storyline? Is her being like, you think that you can stop this by beating people up, but like this is what it is. Like this is why people are living like this.
But she says it at the same time. She's like, well, this is why we have an impartial system, while at the same time totally acknowledging too that the judge is paid off. It's how to do this. Like, this guy got put in the same cell as Carmine Falcone, so he knows all the stuff, but the judge was paid off. So she's
Your
like
system is
saying it,
broken.
but it's also, yeah, but I don't know. It feels very surface level, and I think that comes off with the construction of these criminals, like the Falcones, like the Judge Flasses, the Judge whatever his name is, and, you know, some of the other guys. That and the fact that there's so many amazing characters, it's difficult to get into the backgrounds of a lot of these folks. You kind of just have to maybe ride on the understanding, or you know, the history of the lore, maybe, and just kind of go with it. So I don't know.
I will say the one thing that's important to understand about this Batman that I really like, I think this is like one of the most brilliant things about this portrayal of Batman, is he's not just roaming the streets fighting like, oh, there's a robbery, I'll fight that guy. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
He literally his kind of like actions as Batman are like PR stunts, right? Like, he knows when this crime is going to be committed. He knows what he has to do to like get it in the papers and to get like the police on it. So that's kind of how he plans his thing, and he makes a big show of it, and he, you know, ties the mob boss down on a light and, you know, shines it up in the air. So it's not just like a random occurrence. It's sort of like it's like theater, you know what I mean?
Right.
Which I really I think is a cool, again, another kind of, this movie goes to such great lengths to kind of make like, well, how would Batman really work? Like, how it, you know, and that's like what it's best at, you know?
Yeah.
Well, that was what was so exciting about it when we saw it, or when I saw it, when I was, you know, when it came out, and it was like, oh, like, it was just that feeling of like, that was what was new to me. It was just like, Batman is an idea. You know what I mean? Like, it's like that profound, not profound thing that's just like feels very profound when you see it, when you're just like, yeah, you do have to become an idea. Like, that's how I felt when I saw it. Like, I don't know.
Well, you buy
like,
his journey. You know what I mean? Like when he's telling Alfred about it on the plane. I mean, it's just such a. I really think so much of this movie is like works because of Christian Bale's performance. And when he
Yeah.
like drops onto the floor first thing when he gets up and like starts doing these like crazy push-ups like super fast,
Yeah.
you're just like Christian Bale is that guy. Like, you know, he could become Batman if he wanted to. You know what I mean? Like
He
it's
is
the
because,
intensity
you know, he did
behind
all
his
of the
eyes
He set
press
the
that
tone
sells
for
this
American
film.
Psycho, you know?
Yes.
all the press
Yes.
he does in an American accent. You know, he like
For this movie.
wants to. I mean, for this movie, that's
In
what I
every
mean.
movie.
So it's like, well, because any movie that he's playing in American, which is most of his movies, because he's like wants to become an idea. You know, like he doesn't like. He is this guy. I do agree.
I think he's a spiritual sibling of Christopher Nolan too, and I think the same. He kind of brings the same intensity and insanity to his role in The Prestige and also in Michael Mann's Public Enemies. I think it's worth checking out if anybody knows that movie.
Yeah,
Um,
don't watch that movie.
But one other thing when I'm talking about this kind of like badly drawn world that exists kind of outside of like the main storyline or you know, again, visually it's such a cool world, but then like sometimes you just see the edges of Christopher Nolan's imagination, and it's kind of glaring. To me there's one bad scene in this movie, and it's the scene where Bruce Wayne shows up with the models to eat dinner with members of the Wayne board for some reason.
Yeah.
And people are acting like rich fat cats out of like the 1930s or something. And did you notice the femme fatale of Following was the woman?
I know, I did.
Yeah, she
Yeah.
was
Wait,
like,
really?
at least
That's
he's
the blonde-
getting
that's
things
the blonde.
done.
Uh huh.
Oh,
That
I
scene makes
totally
no
didn't notice
sense.
that.
Like,
She
why
was
are these
from
people?
Following,
Why are
yeah.
these people eating dinner together? What is like? You know what I mean? What is the vibe? Like, it? None of that makes any sense, and it doesn't feel real. It doesn't feel good. It's the one false moment I think of Christian Bale's entire performance, because I think he has nowhere to go with what he's doing. Like, he does fake drunk in a couple other scenes really well, but that scene just is. I mean, I get the idea of why they wanted to do that scene, and I like the idea of it, and it just falls on its face because they just couldn't think of like, why do rich people go out to dinner together? Because Christopher Nolan's like, I don't know, I'm like in my room like drawing plans for my next project. Like, I don't know.
But it's not that dissimilar. Like, again, like you said, it's like a tweak of the dial better in Dark Knight when they do it, when they have dinner at the restaurant with.
No, because that's a double date, and that makes some sense. This makes no sense.
That's what I mean. It's like that. It's like it's not
He's
dissimilar
working
as a
within
scene,
a pro-
except
he's
for
working within his,
he
like,
tweaks the scene
limitations.
to be better.
Yes,
right?
he's working
Like-
within his limitations better. This one just
Yeah,
felt like
yeah.
they were going for something. Yeah, you're right, and they kind of fell on their face. The
Also, on a
models
more
that he's with
nitpicky
are
note,
wearing like what?
Like,
I was gonna say, on a more nitpicky note on that scene, that's not exactly how you buy a hotel. You don't just push a check into someone's
the
phone and go,
waiter?
I just
I
bought
know.
you.
To
Like,
the
what?
waiter.
What the
Again,
fuck?
That
So
doesn't work, and
stupid.
it could have been like, it could have made sense. It could have been a cool moment, but they just didn't make it work. And
Yeah.
the models don't work for me because they're wearing like, it's this glitzy place, and they're these beautiful European models. They're wearing like Forever 21 like floral dresses. I really feel like on the day like Christopher Nolan was working some camera move out, and someone ran up to him and is like, "What kind of dresses should the women wear?" And he's like, women, flowers, women like
What are
flowers on
they?"
their dresses, like just no, you know." And speaking of badly portrayed women, Bruce Wayne's mom literally just like smiles and like mugs throughout like
Oh my God.
20 minutes of scenes with her and her husband and her kid, and it's that's also pretty glaring.
There's too much to get into in this movie. I mean, because we aren't really.
I could
And I
talk
also
all day.
Me too.
Let's
I
do
don't
it.
want to move all the way off of what Chris was talking about because I still can't really. Are you talking about like the simplicity? Because it's not that different from the rest of the simplicity bullshit that we're talking about, right? Is that the issue that you're taking with it? Is like you're taking a really simplistic look at like crime in the same way that you're taking a simplistic look at like, you know, that dialogue scene in the restaurant. Like, is that what you're talking about, Chris?
Yeah, I mean, right. And again, I'm not like, this movie sucks because of this, but it's more just the kind of again, glossing over the nature of like, why are there criminals in the first place, which isn't the movie's task to tackle. And I understand that, you know, but I feel like it causes a lot of the background characters to be just kind of, you know, yeah.
The new Batman that Travis didn't like, but you and I both liked a lot, is about that, right? Like that's sort of what that movie is tackling, right?
To say it's tackling
right.
it is
it touches on it more. I mean, I had an idea about like an interesting way to present a Batman narrative that actually is along the lines of Year One, which we kind of talked about a minute ago. I don't want to derail this particular conversation, but I think there's
this
some interesting
has a lot of Year One in
it,
it, though. This movie
there's less of it than I actually thought. I reread Year One after we had discussed it, and I'm like, I remember a certain thing. The biggest one, of course, is the bat sonar in his heel, and it summons all the bats from the bat cave so they can like swarm around. That's a really, really cool idea, and that's one of the like central pieces.
He doesn't use it anymore. I know. I wish he'd use that a couple more times for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. He never uses it again.
He doesn't need it.
But you know, he's got plenty of other wonderful toys, I guess. But I was thinking of an interesting way to do this, because what I really liked about Frank Miller, who wrote Batman Year One, the way the story is told is actually split between two perspectives. It's told in first person, like a lot of comic books are, but it's between Bruce Wayne, and actually the main character is arguably Jim Gordon. He's moving to Gotham, he's newly appointed, and he's actually seeing firsthand, because he's the one who's on the streets, literally embedded in the criminal enterprise. He sees all of the corruption at the base levels. Like every single person that he works with is under someone's thumb or directly related. So I like being able to see the way that crime is actually portrayed through the eyes of the only quote, you know, only moral police enforcer, you know, or police officer on the force, it seems like. And so it kind of gives the viewer a really like ground level view of and like an internal sort of sense of the level and the pervasiveness of the corruption of Gotham City through the eyes of Jim Gordon. I really like that approach, and Batman is a bit removed from that, because obviously he's in his ivory tower of Wayne Manor and whatnot. Right. He's on the ground, obviously. He doesn't live that, but I like the way that the Year One kind of touches on that. That was
so
really cool.
Leading up to this movie, after the critical, and I think it was a hit for sure, Batman and Robin, right? But like the critical, I don't know.
Me and Chris didn't see it.
Oh, Batman and Robin? No, I don't know about that. Yeah, I'm not sure.
I'm saying, I don't know how much money it lost or whatever, but for whatever reason, they were like, we need to fucking stop this train, right?
Yeah.
And then all of these people came with their ideas, and some of them were a lot like what you're talking about, right? Like Nolan ended up winning the rights to Batman, but like there was the Wachowskis, I always do that. The Wachowskis, and Aronofsky, who all made like great strides to making another one. Obviously there was another Tim Burton movie that was like long gestating too, that like he was gonna make Batman Continued or whatever it was called. Batman Continues was the third one that he was gonna do.
That's a horrible name.
I mean,
Batman Begins is not
keeps
the best
going.
name.
Batman Begins is a bad name, though. I remember at the time being like, "That's
Batman
not a
keeps
sentence.
going.
Like, what is that?" But I don't know. Anyway, there is a lot, and I think that like for sure there was pitches for like that. I mean, Year One was the Wachowskis' pitch, right? Like they were gonna make that version of it. Obviously, in their hands, who the fuck knows what it would have been like? But I do think that it's interesting that this parallel sort of that they've been running, the Wachowskis and Nolan, like diverged right here, where like he got their Batman attempt, right?
And what do you mean? Like, what do you mean by that?
Well, I mean that like,
how did it diverge?
So,
what are you talking about?
So they were like you talked about, like they had this sort of moment after the Matrix where like everything became let's be the Matrix, right? And then he makes Batman Begins. Like maybe their Batman would have been a Matrix-esque Batman, who knows? But then he makes Batman Begins, and then you get a complete polar shift in what movies do after that, right? You get Casino Royale, you get fucking.
I was gonna say Casino
like-
Royale is the big example,
Mhm.
yeah. But like even
Right.
especially after Dark Knight, like I mean the Hans Zimmer score was so influential. You know what I mean? Like
Mhm.
just that kind of like the gravity of movies like totally changed. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's what I just mean is that like it kind of shifts their like
The cinema
polarities
shifts.
in a
The
way,
cinema
you know what I
shifts.
mean?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah. They
yeah.
don't change as directors, but yeah, the movies
Right.
around them.
Yeah,
change.
exactly. Yeah, exactly. Can I say something about Hans Zimmer since we're talking about him?
Yeah.
Uh,
Zim talk. Let's go.
What you got?
what an important part of this movie, and it made me realize when we're talking about auteurs how much of what an auteur is to me is when they have a fucking composer that they work with all the time, right? Like that defines like, how much of Christopher Nolan that we think of is like the Hans Zimmer score from that one, right? Like that's such a huge part of it. And like going into this, it's like he found this other piece because this is the first time he uses him. And it's like he found this other piece of his puzzle, right? That
Mhm.
he's gonna like use moving forward. And I think about like when you think about the Coen brothers or Tim Burton or like these like people who have such a distinct
Steven
style.
Spielberg. For Scorsese,
Spielberg
it's
is
the
a
Rolling
great-
Stones. It's not a composer, but it's the same
You're
thing,
right.
same idea.
Yeah. And how much of what you think of when you think of their style, it's not obviously all of it, but it's like this huge factor, right? And like now that he found his guy, now you have Christopher Nolan. I feel like it's like Nolan Begins, right? And it's because of Hans Zimmer in a lot of ways. Like, I don't know. I think that
score
his
is-
music is so good in this movie, and it gets better in The Dark Knight even. But
The movie.
I don't know. It just feels like he found like his voice. You know.
I'm
what I
so
mean?
glad
Like,
you said
it's-
this, Ian. The musicality of films, not music in films, but like the music of films,
Mhm.
is like one of my like biggest kind of like focuses when I watch like a movie or
Yeah.
when I think of film in general. And the rhythms of a movie and the kind of like the way it like plays over in your head is music like to me. You know what I mean? The way you push play and
It
you just
is.
like experience it. I think that's an understated or under like appreciated element of films. Somebody tweeted this recently about The Dark Knight. They were like, why is it that random lines from this movie pop into my head like all the time? And they're like, I should not be thinking every day of some random background actor going, no more dead cops. But I do.
Right.
And it's like, I really think it's because he's such a good, I don't know how to say it, like composer, conductor of these films that like every moment kind of hits at exactly the right place. I mean, this is why I think editing is really so important in his films. And I think the music goes along with that. That they have this kind of musical quality that they just play over and over again in your mind. They just kind of sit in your mind. And I think Ghostbusters is like your favorite movie, Chris, is a great example of a movie that does that.
Right.
Like that movie
Absolutely.
just like, those lines just kind of like have such an amazing musical quality to them that they just kind of like stick in your brain. And this one, there's actually a pretty big, for as much exposition and dialogue as there is in this movie, there's some wonderful, almost wordless sequences with Bruce Wayne doing different stuff. And the moment where he goes into the Batcave, I don't know, but he goes down into the Batcave with it like a lamp, and he gets like swarmed by bats. And that edit on the music as he's
That's
like
one
kind of
of the
summoning
best.
his strength and
Absolutely.
kind of like going like the way he stands like is just a masterful performance. Just like his face with his eyes closed, what he's conveying, and the way he awkwardly kind of holds his hands out as he like summons the strength to like deal with this in all-encompassing fear, this trauma that he like somehow conflates his parents' death that he blames himself for and this like bat attack that he suffered, cuts on the music as that kind of theme blares out. One of the coolest moments in any movie that I can
And
think of.
you're
Certainly
right
the pinnacle
that
of
it's the-
superhero cinema, in my opinion.
It's the music. I mean, it's the performance and the editing and all that stuff, but like the music is for sure I don't know. That's the voice of it, right? And like it is hugely important. I think about Alfonso Cuarón, who is like the Coen brothers in that he makes these vastly different genre of movies, right? Where he'll go from like a sci-fi movie to a drama to whatever. But when you think about a director that has like, you know, let's say Tim Burton has Danny Elfman or Sam Raimi has Danny Elfman, where it's like, it doesn't matter if they're making a horror movie or a comedy or a shitty fucking Disney movie or whatever they're doing. Like the thing that's going through all of it, one of the main things is this sort of familiarity of voice that the composer brings to it, right? I mean, even though this is the first Hans Zimmer film that has the Nolan, because I think Nolan brought a lot to Hans Zimmer, obviously, also. Like, it's not just that, like, he found his voice, but Zimmer's been around forever, and he's, like, a famous, you know, guy at this point. But, like, his fucking work changes so dramatically after this. And I think that they found each other and, like, you know, it's that thing that like when you find like a partner and you're like, holy shit, like we speak the same language now.
Yeah. I mean, he's no Carter Burwell or anything, but hey, you know.
Carter Burwell is, a great example.
I'm just kidding.
Like, you should probably.
David Lynch and Angelo Badalamenti are another one where it's it's not only are they both like key to, I mean, not only is the music key to David Lynch's films, and especially Twin Peaks, but also David Lynch was a big collaborator on those scores. He would actually sit with him while he was composing and go, no, yes. And that's kind of how they came upon that music. He was dictating exactly what he wanted because he's a musician as well. But I think like Christopher Nolan also has that effect on his collaborators. Like, I mean, his cinematographer, Wally Pfister, I mean, the way he talks about Christopher Nolan is like he's like his master, like, you know what I mean? And he's like so I don't know. I think he has like a vision that is like all encompassing, and he's able to like kind of you know, pass along like his vision to his collaborators, which is like that's a really powerful gift in itself. You know what I mean? Like having a vision is one thing, like bringing people into your fold and like, you know, selling them on it and like, you know, effectively, you know, conveying exactly what you need is so important. Right. And clearly he's doing it.
I was going to say partly why I like Denis Villeneuve, because he collaborated with Johan Johansson, and there's like a certain vibe between a lot of his movies, like Sicario, Arrival, Prisoners. They have this like this really like low kind of humming, and there's like ominous kind of undertone to it that really sets like a kind of common ground for a lot of that film. So when you have a director like an auteur that has that collaborator, like you said, it kind of creates this sort of consistent, you know, feel.
Well, and when you get
films.
to somebody like Spielberg, who, you know, has used John Williams forever, and like you get the feeling watching Spielberg's movies, especially by the time he gets to like Jurassic Park or something, where he just knows how much he can lean on his composer, right? Like, you know that he's not worried about it. Like, you know that when you see the fucking T-Rex burst out, that he's like, this is going to be a moment because of the music. And like, I don't know, it just feels like that's such a collaboration, obviously. And I feel like this is the same thing with Nolan, where it's like, by the time you get to Inception and Hans Zimmer's the star of the movie, where it's like, you know how much he's just like, I got this voice. Like I know how to use it, right?
Right.
Okay. We should talk more about the movie. Let's get I mean, we talked about Christian Bale's performance. We all agree.
Not enough. I know. You know, Christian Bale was like one of my favorite actors growing up. I'd see him in just random stuff. Little Women, he gives an incredible performance in. If you've seen the movie Newsies, he gives an unnecessarily like intense and like Oscar like level kind of performance of a street urchin in a film where everyone else is doing like the equivalent of like a Looney Tunes cat hobo, like, you know what I mean? There's this character in the movie Newsies called Crutchy, who is just like a googly-eyed little kid who's like, gee, what do you think we should do, guys? And he's like walking on a crutch. He knows he's in like a Disney musical. And then Christian Bale at one point has to like avenge Crutchy's like bullying or something. And he has like murder in his eyes. He's like a 15-year-old Christian Bale screaming and like beating up thugs. This is for Crutchy! And it's it's unsettling.
for
but
Crutchy.
Finally, this is like when I heard that he was going to play Batman, I was just like so excited because I also love the Batman comics and I loved Christian Bale as an actor. But watching his performance last night was like just so fun and such a thrill. And I don't know,
It's so many performances. I mean, he's playing. I mean, we were doing the joke of the dark voice, right? Which he does in this, but obviously it's not as intense as it gets.
not as pronounced, not as ridiculous.
Yeah, but like it still is like he's doing Bruce Wayne. He's doing the Bruce Wayne that he's pretending to be.
Yes.
He's doing Batman, he's pretending to be, but also like different than the Batman. I mean, than the Bruce Wayne he's pretending to be.
Yes.
It's like it's incredibly nuanced performance.
Kevin Conroy, famously did the like Batman is the real Bruce Wayne and Bruce Wayne is like the put on. He's the guy who voiced the cartoon, and I think that's a really like the iconic like Batman portrayal in a way. He is doing Christian Bale in this movie is like you said, there's like 3 different Bruce Waynes, but there's also the nuance of he presents himself differently to different people in his life, like even when he's being quote unquote himself. The way he shows up for Rachel Dawes as this kind of like whiny baby who like needs a mom is like so different than the way he shows up to every guy in the movie. And when I say guy, it's interesting to note that literally wherever Bruce Wayne goes in this movie, he finds an old man to be friends with. He doesn't like, there's no one around his own age who he's like having a conversation with. When he's like in an Asian prison, the only friend he has is like this old man who's like telling him like what's going on. When he, and then of course he meets Ducard, right? And even when he's climbing up the mountain to go to like the secret training facility, he goes through a village, and I'm like, I know an old man is going to come out and share some words with him, and of course, certainly was. He's most himself with Alfred, right? And then, but also like Lucius Fox, and he has this kind of easy repartee with those guys, and he like, it's like he wants to be like cool with them, and it's like, to me, it's really like he wants a father figure, and all these guys are kind of like father figures to him, and he's like, oh yeah, I'm cool, I'm like the coolest guy in the world, and then Rachel comes out and he's like, oh, actually, I'm really sensitive. And, and that is like an incredible thing to do with his performance, like he didn't have to do that. Like, and that continues throughout the film. Like these guys like Gordon and like, Gordon, Lucius and Alfred are like these kind of old men that he like bonds with and trying to like have like some sort of like father figure.
Yeah, great point. It's like, because his dad obviously is this huge figure and, but it's kind of like sucks for Martha. Like, what about Martha? That lady's got to be awesome too. There's like, she's just nothing in this movie at all. Like, she's just there.
I mean, Christopher Nolan is, there's no.
We can go on about his perspectives
no
on women. I know.
In his movies, they don't exist.
No,
and like you said, Travis, like that's a really good point about him with Rachel, but she's like the biggest women character in this movie.
She is, and she also sucks. And I also feel like she's not a great addition to like the Batman story. Like I really feel like they plugged in like a love interest that like does not it just doesn't add that much to the story in my opinion. Like I don't know. I see why they.
Well, the way that Casino Royale did the Rachel thing, right?
No,
I mean, it's not the Rachel thing, but like they introduce like Bond as somebody who fell in love and then has his heart broken kind of too, right? Like, and coming off of this movie, and that fucking works for me. Like that.
Well, they're leaning less on this movie, in my opinion, than on Her Majesty's Secret Service, which I think they used as also a blueprint for that film. I think it was more like on Her Majesty's Secret Service, like with the tone of Batman Begins, in terms of like how to make Bond work. But I think Rachel is like, I don't like the name. I don't love either actress's performance in the role. They're fine, but like they just don't add enough to the story to like warrant like this huge pivotal, like all encompassing, kind of thing. And again, what she brings out of Bruce Wayne is this kind of whiny baby version of him. And I like don't want them to get together, basically. You know what I mean? When he meets Selena Kyle and she's like his equal, I'm like, yeah, get yourself a bad bitch. You deserve it.
We can talk about that movie in a couple of weeks, but I think We have to. I mean, we're fucking for real, like going way too long.
Well, it's a
'cause
long
We haven't
movie.
gotten to so many of the
It's a long
important
movie. Let's
things.
talk
We
about it.
haven't talked about like, okay, MVP besides so many other MVPs, but Gary Oldman in this movie, what a fucking great performance and a great choice to like cast this really intense guy in a not intense role. You know what I mean? Like it's so not a Gary Oldman role. Uh and he fucking kills it. Like he brings this, we've talked a lot about how Christopher Nolan has no emotionality in his movies, right? I
I
feel
don't buy
so
that.
much emotion.
I don't buy that. I really don't. But go ahead.
I feel so much emotion
we've disproven
in
that.
Gary Oldman's eyes. Like the way that he looks at young Bruce and the way that he like just in that opening era, when he's still just the sort of beat cop guy. And he's like, I mean, yes, a cab, but like Jim Gordon's a good cop, right? Like, and like you feel it from him in this like fatherly role, like you're saying. And like when he is in it later and you're like, I don't know, I just think he did such a great job. He was supposed to be Ra's al Ghul, or he like wanted him for Ra's al Ghul.
That's another Christopher Nolan thing, whitewashing the cast and characters of the Batman mythos. Ra's al Ghul obviously is a Middle Eastern guy, and Bane was originally written as like a Hispanic guy. The Mask was like a luchador thing. But speaking of emotion, I mean, how good is he's good in all the movies, but the central kind of emotional figure to me in this movie is Michael Caine as Alfred. Yeah,
like it's about time.
100%.
Right.
Yeah,
I mean, we
100%.
have to talk about it because we talked about how Hans Zimmer becomes his voice after this movie, but Michael Caine becomes his literal fucking exposition voice. Like he's not the exposition as much in this movie. He does a lot of it, but like, I mean, what a fucking performance. He's so good in this movie. And he becomes Nolan's guy, right? Yeah. He's in every one of them after this, I think. And I fucking love him. Like, he brings that warmth to the eyes also. Like, there's no part of me that thinks that this movie isn't emotional, for that reason.
He's almost ruins every other Alfred for me, especially when I watched The Batman and it's Gollum that's Alfred. I'm like, what the fuck is this?
Yeah.
What? Really?
Can I say, I have turned a corner on Andy Serkis, and I think he sucks. I went from thinking he was great. I really did. I thought he was great. And now I watched him in...
It's just too much, huh? Too much of everything?
I think he's a fucking hack. He's a ham.
Black Panther?
Andy Serkis.
He's not a hack, but I'm tired. He's just kind of tired. I
had to step away for a moment. If we're talking about The Batman, let's just cut it. Like, it's not interesting. It's not good. It's not fun to talk about.
No, we were just talking about how I just brought up
saying,
Alfreds and subsequent Alfreds and how like basically just Michael Caine ruins every other Alfred for me because he's that guy, Well, you want him to be every Alfred.
Again, the relationship is so key in these films and like so human and like that part of these films is so key, just the way that it's like a story of a guy and Batman again is like this kind of like side thing that he's doing.
Well, you get these people these performers who are so good that in other hands some of the lines that they say would feel as clunky as some of the lines in this movie can feel, right? Yeah. Like even him saying something like, "Why do we fall?" So that we could, that stuff. Like, what a brilliant, profound, beautiful thing, and like what an important sort of theme in this movie, right? Like that's the whole thing for Nolan. Is a huge part of it. Is just like you got to keep fucking pushing to be the person that you want to be, right? And like, and I think that like. The way that Michael Caine delivers it, like, gives you fucking goosebumps. But, like, imagine somebody else. Yeah, imagine Andy Serkis doing it.
Imagine the guy who plays Bruce Wayne's dad saying it. It's annoying.
Yeah, exactly.
The only line that I take aim that he repeats in a later Christopher Nolan movie is in Interstellar, but we'll talk about that movie later. But, because it's Dylan Thomas.
Is this the same year as Children of Men, or the year before?
think it might be the year
2005 is when this
before.
came out.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was 2005 or 2006. One
Let me
of those
check it
was,
out.
was Children of Men. But either way, it's what a fucking year for Michael Caine to be like,
Yeah.
80 and just fucking dropping bombs like of great performances. Right?
2006 is Children of Men,
Yeah.
apparently. So he did that the year after this.
You know,
Yeah.
just to talk about a couple last things, like the other shot that I love, besides the sequence where he goes into the Batcave, is when he's like cresting the mountain and the camera kind of goes up with him, kind of cranes up, and it kind of reveals these like weird, like, Buddhist or something flags like in the ice, and it kind of looks like one of those, what's that guy's name, Caspar David Friedrich paintings, with where a guy is like looking out over some vast expanse, and it's just like extremely like romantic and like evocative and
Right.
kind of creepy, and just a beautiful shot, and just like so powerful.
I'm always a big fan of Christopher Nolan's either helicopter or like flying over like a scene, like in
Yes.
Inception is like he's just kind of hovering over the landscape.
Well, he does it
He does
in,
a great job of
Insomnia has a great one
Yep.
of those.
right, exactly. That's what I meant, Insomnia. And I think what I really liked about one of the shots was that I really love are when he has Batman like as a gargoyle and kind of surrounding,
Yes.
like kind of. It just looks great because he stands out. Literally, like I said, he stands out against the background, but he's also like that role of the gargoyle, like the protector, the watcher of the city, essentially. And it could be really cheesy in certain ways, but it works for whatever reason. It's just there, and he uses that camera so well and so effectively to just communicate that idea, that symbol. Getting back to that idea. Of
Well,
a
you have to
symbol.
become an idea.
You have to.
What do you
You
think
don't
of
have a
Liam
choice.
Neeson? Since we're just going through the
Love him.
people
I mean, the
list?
highlight, one of the real highlight of the movie is when they're doing the sword fight on the ice. Like that sequence is so cool to me. Like I love that stuff. I love.
You notice he's got a dead wife. Just ding.
He's
ding, ding for
extremely
another,
like, oh yeah, dead
Christopher
wife, of
Nolan.
course. He's I mean, he's so much like Cobb, right? The way he's like kind of like. I mean, these movies almost play like a self-help. Like they're like a self-help guru, right? Like it's almost like a Jordan Peterson or something like that training video, where it's
Yeah,
like
you're right.
where it's
It
like
is a lot,
it's all about
but it
like
works.
get your act together, clean your dojo, like train, and then we'll do this thing, and then
Well, and they do like say. I mean, I think it's Tom Wilkinson says you can never not be Bruce Wayne, right? Like you could go fucking 3,000 miles away, you're still fucking daddy's little rich boy, right?
right,
And like that's sort of what he's battling in the beginning part of the movie.
Yeah.
Is like, and even further into it is just like this idea, and that is like the conceit of the movie is like, how do you overcome like who you have always been,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Like that's sort of like the Nolan conceit
well, yeah,
in a lot of his movies.
yeah. Can you like become who you were meant to be, or can you change who you are? You know what I mean? That's sort of like different ways of looking
Yeah.
at kind of the same thing. But
I like Liam Neeson in this. I think he's
yeah, he's great.
he's this is after Star Wars, obviously, like 10 years after Star Wars or something, or 8 years. But he's sort of like in this phase of his career, I guess, where he's the sort of master Jedi, guy. And he does carry a little bit of that into this performance, which I like, I didn't really, I mean, I don't know. Is it too late to start getting into
No,
the whitewashing of it more?
He's
there
great.
is that part of it too. Whereas like you get Ken Watanabe who just gets fucking schooled.
Right.
Because it's like, come on. what
The
are
building
we
fell
doing?
on him. He's just bad luck. But
It was bad luck.
but I have to say a couple things. Like, yeah, he's great.
Cillian Murphy?
No, I'm thinking of somebody from. It's crazy we haven't talked about him, but
I know.
But who's the guy?
Rutger Hauer?
I'm trying to think. Is RZA from the Wu-Tang Clan? He commented on this film, talking about like, well, to me, this movie kind of goes, ironically, as we follow the train, when it's gonna blow. The movie kind of goes off the rails a little bit there. It kind of gets taken.
Yeah.
The momentum of the big action set piece kind of overtakes the story, and like the action all feels very muddled at that point. Like we've seen everything Batman does, so it's just like a little more of that. Everything kind of goes into like a CGI laboratory, and it kind of becomes less compelling to me. His final fight with Ra's al Ghul, aka Ducard, in the train. Like if they had if they had just done some cool ninja moves, this is what RZA said. He's like, these are supposed to be like trained ninjas, and we've seen Batman fighting in kind of like these like really chopped up kind of ways. This was like very much the style at the time, right? This kind of like Born Identity kind of style. If we had just seen one sequence where they had cool choreographed ninja battle moves, and we know Christian Bale can do it. He was in Equilibrium. We know Qui-Gon Jinn can do it. Like, give me some like something like that, just something to like sink my teeth into. Like, bring the physical kind of like battle up a notch. And they kind of don't do it. They just kind of stumble around each other and literally just say lines from earlier in the movie, which again, a huge, pet peeve of mine. I do think that battle is a little disappointing. So that's my one caveat with liking him.
Mm-hmm.
He just doesn't bring in. He doesn't bring in that last fight.
It's a huge problem in almost all superhero movies. Is like the final fight, right? Even the first Batman, the Tim Burton one, is like, I dare you to watch that final fight and not fall asleep. It's so fucking weird and not interesting.
Unlike Kim Basinger just hanging off of Batman.
It's never easy. And same thing for Dark Knight. Even it's always really hard to fucking nail the end of a superhero movie, I think. But this one doesn't do it.
Well, I think Dark Knight does it, but this one, the action set piece doesn't really work. But there are little, again, visual moments and like moments of visual storytelling that are really compelling throughout that.
Well, I do like that after the action scene ends, and you get sort of back to the prologue sort of style of filmmaking, where it's like, sort of panning through these scenes where it's just like, he talks about the Joker's coming and like that kind of stuff, and rebuilding the whatever, all like rebuilding Gotham basically.
I really don't understand the significance of the last line being, "Hey, you'll never have to say thank you." Like, I don't understand that.
I know.
It reminds me of like, love means never having to say you're sorry. Like, it's like they really trying to go for something there that just did not catch on.
You'll never have to.
Don't say you're sorry. Batman, 2005.
But the ends of each one of them, though, like you say, the music always just really makes, I think a lot of the reason we all bounce out is that music, right? And it always ends with this triumphant, like, you're feeling like you can take on the whole world after that movie's over. Like that one in Dark Knight specifically, we're like, oh my god, yes.
I think Nolan is actually really good at endings, like the last shot or like the last moment of a movie. It's just like you kind of lose a bit of interest, or I do at least, during the last action.
We talked about it during Insomnia too. It's like that had that last action scene that was just like, wait, we're doing this now?
Right.
It's very similar.
Bye.
Right?
They're dead. See ya. Thanks for coming.
But and the shot of Batman like fluttering and that sound effect of his cape when he's like kind of flying through the sky is so cool.
Definitely.
Can we just really quick talk about Cillian Murphy? Is it Cillian Murphy?
Cillian Murphy.
Yeah, and he's great in this movie, right? He was like a revelation in this movie. Like I knew who he was before, but like to me it was I thought that, like, Chris, I think you disagree maybe. But
he gets better as the movie goes on for certain. He's the first time you see him, he's this smug little smarmy little biatch and like almost over the top like smugness. You're like, wait a minute, is this going to be this guy's character?
That's what I want from like
but no, I liked him way more as it
gone
on.
Yeah,
I think he nails that exactly but like that's what I want. Like,
right,
I don't want
you want to lead off with that, I guess.
Right.
You have to set that tone, I guess. Yeah.
And I think
he's great in everything.
The thing that we haven't really talked about, we haven't talked a lot about like the plot of the movie that much. You obviously laid it out at the beginning, but the drug serum, whatever that they give, the gas that they fucking Scarecrow uses, I love that stuff. I fucking love when the Batman uses it and you get that 1 minute thing that will be forever in my fucking psyche of like a giant Batman being like, it's like
the black blood dripping out of his mouth or whatever it is.
Such intense non-Christopher Nolan filmmaking in that scene. Like,
totally.
It's so against what he does.
Same thing with
'Cause
Flash
it's
when
not
he's
psyche,
like a
it's-
skeleton kind of like look when Flash is Gordon's partner is talking to, and it's like this crazy creepy skeleton kind of look over his face. That's awesome. And when Batman's flying over the criminals and everyone's tripping out, it's like these fiery eyes like a bat flying over people.
They
It's
tried
great.
some wild stuff in this movie, including like the some of which worked better than others, but like the Narrows being this kind of like little kind of Hong Kong-esque kind of almost like Blade Runner kind of like future city with little people riding their motor carts around, and it's like it looks very much like a set and like very phony and not really, to me, not really impressive. But like I do appreciate that they kind of went for some wilder stuff that they kind of drop it for the later films in favor of like a cleaner kind of modern look.
I do love when Scarecrow uses the serum and on Falcone too, though. Like, and like just the horror of those moments is wild. Like it's out of the movie in a weird way, and in a good way, because it kind of jolts you a little bit back into it, you know.
Totally. I mean, just parts, like I said, there's so many parts where you just have to kind of take your brain out. It's like to presume no one's ever boiled water in Gotham, like at all. Like, okay, I'm making coffee today, time to turn on the kettle. Yeah! Like no one's been affected at all yet,
That's
but
a good point.
again,
They should have had like a couple like, why are people going crazy? Why are tea drinkers like going crazy lately?
Well, and just the black and whiteness of it all, like when Gordon actually watches the thing being dumped in, and he talked to the scientist guy. He's like, well, it clearly has to be powder form, so it must be vaporized in order to like take effect. It's like that's the only possible way. You just deduce that immediately. Awesome.
Yeah.
But, just little stuff like that. But again, he gets a major pass. This movie rules still, and despite some of these little flaws that all add up in the end.
We can do an edit point right here and then make this a little mini so if we want to. But can we talk a little bit about the trope of, or not even the trope, the bad thing where we talked about it a little bit off the pod. That's how I know we can talk about it, of where the bad guy's right and we have to like suspend our true beliefs to root for the good guy.
This isn't that though. I don't think this is that. This is two people who have a similar vision of the world. But they're separated by like an ideological line. This is how I see the world. This is how I act with the world. I will not cross this line. I define myself this way. And that's different than two people who have a different view of the world, or one is just right and one is just kind of reactive to them. I don't know. To me, this doesn't feel like it plays into that. It's or there is a trope that you're talking about where the villain is right, and it's kind of, that's what makes it difficult, like you said, and what makes it compelling is that you're like, oh shit, like he's onto something, but the solution kind of like challenges me in some way, and I don't know. I don't feel like this movie is that exactly. I don't know.
I guess I don't either, except for, I mean, because I'm against wiping out an entire city, and also I don't really know how Ducard's logic really works. Like, how was he around? Like, how did he really do it? Like, like I don't really buy it. But I do think that like this sort of line that's drawn between what Bruce Wayne wants to do and what Ducard wants to do is so like made up in our minds just because we have to root for Batman, right? Like this idea, even the line, I don't have to save you, where it's just like, you can't kill me, or whatever. He's like, yes, but I don't have to save you. It's like, well, but that's killing you. Like you're making up this invisible line.
I wish that line was different. I really do. That felt really weak at the time. It almost works, but not quite. Yeah.
And it doesn't exactly apply that in the next movie either, where Joker literally is falling and he grabs him. Like, you could easily save thousands of lives probably by just not saving him and doing the same thing you did with Ducard, but for some reason
the Joker was taking a lot of sleeping medication at the time, and Batman knew that if he just let nature take its course.
But it is this sort of leap we have to take, and it's not even hard to take because we're sort of it's been impressioned on us from comics and from everything that like you root for Batman, right? Like
Well-
you don't have to make that logic leap, but it is something like in those moments where when he says I don't have to save you, where it's like my mind even in 2005 is just like okay. Like, I don't know.
Well, he
like,
could have just said
you
like,
do
you
have
know,
to
you
save
you wanted to crash this train, and like, you know, like I'm just gonna peace out. Like, you know, he didn't have to say like, I don't have to save you. Like, it just sounds so stupid and like, you know, yeah, technical.
But it also does point out to us that like, I mean, at least it did to me, that like this invisible barrier where Batman doesn't kill people, that he's like, that's my fucking rule, right? It's like, okay, but you know, that kind of just makes it more I don't know. It makes me think about like the difference between him and Ducard differently. I don't know. It's like
How?
uh, so he doesn't kill people. Like you said with the Joker, right? It's like I'm not saying he should kill people. That's the Ducard thing, right? That's why we know Ducard is a bad guy, because he kills people. Because his idea, he's right. Gotham is fucking broken, right? But his answer is we wipe it out.
Terrorism.
Yeah, terrorism. Obviously, that's wrong, but they both have the right idea that like Gotham is broken, and like Batman's version of it is terrorism without killing, right? And it's this like, I don't know. It just makes me kind of like question um things that I don't know. It's really kind of
Well, I mean, he does plenty of
what
things
makes
that
Batman
kind of,
the good guy. Is it just because he refuses to kill people? Like he's not. Maybe it's back to what Chris is saying. Is like he's not really changing things. Like,
Well, I think
guess
it's
he's
important,
trying,
like,
but-
you know, to look, you know, all these Batman movies, like it's including the Batman, your precious the Batman, like another terrible title. They you know, they deal with like the real world in a very superficial way. But I think what makes Christopher Nolan's different than that latest one is he is starting out from like a philosophical look at things, not like a real world look at things. And I think that again, that like is why when you actually see the criminals in the police system and stuff like that, it doesn't really make any sense, and it doesn't really it doesn't come off as like it's drawn well or anything like that. It just kind of it's just again, it's just an idea, right? But so I don't know. I think it's I don't know. Does that make any sense? I think he just starts with like this kind of philosophical idea, and like the more you try to like lay it on top of the real world and make sense of it that way, it doesn't work. It only makes sense as like this is like a person willing themselves to do like this great thing, but they, you know, set these boundaries for themselves, and somebody else has different boundaries, and then that's going to cause conflict. And how do you resolve that? And
It does feel
you know, I
like
don't know.
it does feel like Dark Knight gets into more of the Nolan thing of like we're two sides of the same coin, right?
Mhm,
Like
right.
In a lot of ways, Ducard and Batman are two sides of the same coin a lot more than Joker and Batman are, right?
Right.
Like they are actually almost exactly the same.
well, he's like his shadow. He's like the shadow of Batman, the thing he's trying to resist, right? He's basically like the one who is that part of Batman that he's trying to fight, really. Like he understands that the existence of the evil, he wants to eradicate it, but the means by which he wants to achieve those goals are two different things. And Batman understands, you know, there's something to be had about, you know, you need to destroy and start anew, but I can't destroy. That's my ethical line, the line that distinguishes me from the criminals. And so, you know, we talk about shadows and whatnot, but that's really like Ducard is, I think, functionally speaking, written as Bruce Wayne's shadow or Batman's shadow.
I think
you
you're
know,
right. I think that
Totally.
that's the thing I couldn't put my finger on a second ago, is that like, you know, it's where, you know, Ducard is he's like, we can't become the criminals, right? Like that's Batman's thing. But I think that when he gets pointed out like that, especially in the moments like, but I don't have to save you, it doesn't feel like he's not becoming the criminal to me. Like it doesn't feel like he's this as heroic as he thinks he is in that kind of moment.
Remember that this movie came out like again like in the middle of like the I mean towards the beginning of the Iraq War, and like the idea that another like that there were terrorists out in the world, and that there were like sleeper cells and stuff like that in existence, you know. was a real thing, and there were people looking at like, you know, America and its problems, like, and being like, well, we do like outsource all this kind of like political violence to these other regions and stuff like that, and you know, and this is like what we are experiencing is a form of like blowback and stuff like that, and what are the answers to these things? And again, I think Christopher Nolan's approaching it from kind of an abstracted place, you know, where literally like whether Ducard or Bruce Wayne will kill like a random sheep farmer or whatever the hell doesn't really have an analogous like real world thing to where you can lay it over, but I think that's what he was kind of trying to explore, like those kind of ideas. Someone asked him in an interview after this film, like, do you consider yourself a political filmmaker? And he said yes, like right away. And he's like, that's exactly what I'm doing. Like, I'm talking about politics. I'm talking about real. He was asked the same question a few years later, once like the Bush doctrine had like kind of fallen out of favor, and he's just like, not really, no, like I don't know.
Oh God.
Well, it's interesting because I think he does have like something to say about like the real world, like and it's very flawed, and it comes from like, I think he, again, like a lot of you know, strains of thinking in like England and America. Like he comes at it from a very you know, abstract kind of like floofy kind of mental place, like playing mental games where he's solving these equations in his head, and then when you get to the real world it doesn't work out. And we'll see that especially I think in Dark Knight Rises, where it's like, what if like the radicals took over and had like, you know, militarized like squads, and like you were living in this kind of like horrible like authoritarian state, but the only thing that could save you is the New York police. And it's like, no, they are the authoritarian state. They are the armed mobs roaming around in tanks, keeping everybody, you know what I mean? Like he just gets it totally backwards in a way. And, you know, I think he, there are like some conservative tendencies at his core that kind of play out and make his kind of like ideology look a little bit foolish in those later films. In this one, I think because it's really just about, because it's so abstracted, it's really just a story about a guy like willing himself to do something and making himself something spectacular, that I think it's like almost like it's a stronger work of art, because it's, you know, there are these kind of like tenuous kind of ties to reality in terms of the real world, like politics that are happening at a specific moment. But it also is just like in Christian Bale's performance, I think you can take so much like for your life, and like the way the story is told is like how like overcoming trauma and like, you know, rebuilding and stuff like that. I don't know. It just, to me, that's where the power of this movie kind of lies. And with the editing, with the music, that's how it's kind of achieved. Not in like, here's a political message that you can take with you to your daily lives. Like, who's really the good guy? I don't think there's a really profound answer to even be had in that conversation.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
What you mean? I get it. It does. And I do think that like, there is a weird disconnect when you're watching an action movie where, you know, politically, I can't think of an action movie that's not problematic in that way. Like, I love guns in movies and I hate guns, right? Like, you have to, like, when it's not overtly problematic, like in Dark Knight or in, you know, lots of movies where it kind of rubs you the wrong way. When it's not that overt, then like I kind of just let it go, and I did in this movie, right? Like that's, I think it's okay to sort of watch his problematic sort of politics play out in a movie like this, and just kind of understand that it's like in this framework of this movie, it's acceptable in a weird way.
Again, I don't think he's
like,
even saying anything like that coherent politically in this movie. It's, I mean, I don't get a message from it. It's like, you know, it's,
I don't either.
It's just kind of a mishmash. Yeah. Like, but so much attention is again paid to like just Bruce Wayne's vision of like, I want to do something. I'm going to change stuff. I'm going to like muscle my way.
Well, it is
in.
a personal Bruce Wayne story. Like this one, definitely more so than the sequels, is just like a man story, you know? So yeah, you're not getting a lot of that. We need to rate.
No, we're not ready. I'm not ready. The most important, we haven't talked about the most important moment of this film, which is, okay, this is not important just within the film, but it's literally, I think, so important to understanding Christopher Nolan. And it's like the key Christopher Nolan moment. I probably should have mentioned it earlier. Sorry. But when Bruce Wayne is at his birthday party, like an old like socialite woman comes up to him and is like, "Oh, Bruce, there's someone you simply must meet." And he's like, and he's like, his name is, how do you pronounce it? Ra's al Ghul. And Bruce Wayne turns around like in slow motion. He's like, "You're not Ra's al Ghul. I watched Ra's al Ghul die." And meanwhile, this old socialite woman, her nose is in the frame. She's right there. But how does she react to this statement? Literally, as Liam Neeson kind of reveals himself, Bruce Wayne turns towards him. She and the phony Ra's al Ghul are in the background of the shot, slightly dimmer, and they just kind of recede into the background. So to me, and you don't question it. You don't go like, "What the hell?" Like, you know what I mean?
Right.
This is what I was, I think, talking about in an earlier episode, where Christopher Nolan puts these like essentially plot holes into his movie, visible to the naked eye, like right there on the screen. And he delights in kind of like misdirection, right? Like with lighting, with audio cues. He's pulling your attention away from the lady so that you forget that she's there an instant after she was speaking to the main character and diverting his attention. It's really astounding. Like
it's totally funny you say
so
that.
Funny.
Well, I think of that exact thing with The Dark Knight. I'm watching this movie, and it's the scene where the Joker basically comes in and invades the party, right? And of course, it ends with Batman and Rachel Dawes flying out the window, and they land on a car. It's like, let's do that again. Let's not do that again, or whatever. And hard cut, go to the next scene. I'm like, wait, that's it? There's the Joker still up there, and they're completely like ignoring everything. He's got this entire crowd hostage, and we just cut and let's just forget all about that. Let's go on to the next scene, you know. But no one said anything, and I'm at the end of the movie like, well, what about the people in the tower? Like, oh yeah, like no one. It's easy to forget. And again, the hard cut, it like jumps to the ground, you know. Yeah. But that's part of his filmmaking and his, you know.
It's funny. It's funny that you chose Christopher Nolan, Chris, because I feel like you're the most observant of those little like plot hole kind of things and like pointing them out. And like you're like Christopher Nolan's nightmare. Like you're like his non-ideal audience member.
No, because I just love what he's going for so much that I am willing, more than any other director largely, to ignore some of those things because of in service of the greater narrative and what he's going for a lot of the time.
I love seeing the themes in movies, you know what I mean? Like where you can tell where a special effect begins and stuff like that. I love that. You can tell when a match on action isn't perfect, or you know what I mean? Like that kind of gives me like a thrill. And I think, again, he loves the kind of the magic quality of cinema, right? Where it's like, this isn't real life. This, you know, you're telling a story in a particular way. You're manipulating space and time and manipulating the audience's attention. And I think that's a big part of the thrill of filmmaking for him. And you see him again in that moment doing it so blatantly, and you'll see it again and again. And I think he talks about that's what he's talking about. Specific, you know, everybody makes a big deal about how Inception is kind of weirdly like the story of like filmmaking or him as a filmmaker. But in The Prestige, he literally says like, "This is what I'm doing. Watch me do it." Like I think that's that's like his key.
Well, and it's funny that he's so protective over his movies leaking or what trailers get made, and like, you know, he's so protective over that kind of thing. But then like, is there anybody who thought that Ken Watanabe was Ra's al Ghul? Like when they watched this movie? I don't know. I don't think that was like I know that like going into it, they're like the villain is Ra's al Ghul. I'm like, huh, okay. And then like, yeah, and Scarecrow's gonna be in it. And then like Ra's al Ghul supposedly dies 5 minutes in. But there was no part of me, even in 2005, that wasn't like, well, Liam Neeson's Ra's al Ghul, right? And he's coming back. Like, I don't know. I think it's more of that sort of. It's weird that he's like so secretive about it when he doesn't seem to care about like that getting.
I think he's just protective of the film experience. You know what I mean? Like, and you know, he's talked about twists in movies, and like he was known like kind of like M. Night Shyamalan at the time as like a big twist guy. Like all his movies have these big twists at the end. And he said, you know, his take on that is like, you know, the best twists in movies aren't the ones where you're like, wait, what the hell? It's more like, oh, of course that's the twist. You know what I mean? Like you're almost expecting it because it's been set up so perfectly. And then you watch the movie again, and like you can see the clues laid out. I mean, and obviously Sixth Sense is a great example of that. But I think he kind of feels the same way too.
Mm-hmm.
I love talking about this movie. I could keep talking about it. I mean, we haven't like touched on like so much.
Two-parter.
Maybe.
Good thing there's 2 other Batman movies we can get into also and expand on
That's
this
true.
But
this
they're
discussion.
different.
They will build on each
They
other, I
are
assure
very
you.
different. And there is going to be too much to talk about in Dark Knight to talk about Batman Begins, I think.
You know, but it is nice, you know, we're talking earlier about different directors like, you know, the Coens and even, you know, Alfonso Cuarón, who make different movies each time. Like it's a slightly different vibe, a different genre. And it's no coincidence, of course, that these 3 Batman movies never followed one another chronologically in terms of release, right? There was like,
Right.
I think the next movie is what, The Prestige, and then the next Batman
then
movie comes
Dark
out, I
Knight.
think 4 years or 3 years after this one was made. Then the, you know, Interstellar, and then Dark Knight Rises, which is I think 4 years after the one before that. So he kind of really gives us a broken up sort of film experience, so we can kind of come back to this instead of being over inundated like maybe Lord of the Rings or something, you know, back to back to back or whatever. So
Yeah.
you know, interested
But
to see
I
where
mean, to
it
that
goes.
point, it also doesn't, as much as it is a trilogy, all 3 movies are so different.
Very different,
tonally,
right.
And like,
Right.
I mean, yeah.
Definitely. Well, should
One
we
last-
should we rank these?
No, one last thing.
Travis.
You can edit this out if you want to. You can edit this out if you want to. But
No, it's okay.
what really struck me this time, again, that image of Bruce Wayne sitting cross-legged on the floor, drinking his like, you know, health drink and doing all this research and stuff, getting everything set up, barefoot on his like mansion floor. It just felt like, you know, it really got back to the roots of Batman, I think, as like a child's fantasy of like a superhero, right? I mean, all like superheroes things are like very much like boy fantasies. But this one does it in a wonderful way. And you really felt like Batman could just be like a made up thing. Like he's in his house, like, oh, what if I did this? And he's like doing this cool drawing, you know what I mean? And then it's just like, oh, there's trouble. And then he doesn't leave his house like and go fight it. He like goes into a cave and then dresses up in a costume and then goes and fights it. You know what I mean? That whole thing has like almost like a dream-like quality. And that's what I was trying to say earlier. Like I can't remember the exact word I'm looking for still. But you know, when he goes into that hole in, you know, to the Batcave for the first time, I mean, it's like he's like entering some chamber of his brain that he didn't want to go into, you know what I mean? Or he wasn't ready to go back into and conquer. And it just has a very like an unreal quality to it, a fantasy kind of quality to it that it makes it so powerful. And then when he goes down there and it's like there's a waterfall in there and all this stuff.
And that's a set, right? They built the whole fucking set.
And he's not saying like, oh my god, there's a waterfall in here. He's just like, cool. and then speaking of the fantasy of like, you know, power fantasies and like, you know, Christopher Nolan's bad politics, it's like when they reassure you like, oh no, these are good rich people. They actually use this incredible cavern to take slaves like from the south to the north, like not sure how that
apparently
works.
Apparently none of those all of those slaves left Gotham because there's no black people in the Narrows or anywhere else.
There's a couple.
Except for Lucius.
No, there's a few. It's a diversity.
Okay. Is there that? No, I agree with you. And it does feel like you want to be Batman in this movie, even as watching it as an adult, which I did. I'm like, oh yeah, like I could do this kind of, I could be this kind of superhero, you know, which is like the magic of Batman when you're a kid too.
Yes.
Like it, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that it's great, and I do think that it is clunky, like you said. There's plenty of stuff that you could pick apart, and like in terms of dialogue, and in terms of like even just the story being fairly unreeled, except for around his sort of arc. But like, there's so much in it that's just, I don't know. I think it's and it fucking changed movies. We didn't really get into it. I mean, it's fucking like, I don't think it was as short a period of time as you do, Travis, that like movies sort of became
Nolanized. No, I'm not saying
you
it
know.
was short. I'm saying it happened. Maybe I did. I didn't mean to, but I think it happened more after Dark Knight is when I started noticing it. A big, you know what I mean? I think you can say, oh, you know, the success of this movie influenced how they did James Bond. I think that's true. But
Speaking of James Bond, because this is a James, like he
It's
always
very
wanted to make a
James
James
Bond.
Bond movie,
Yeah.
and it's so. I mean, Lucius Fox is cute, right? Like, there's so much in this movie that's like just
he's-
his James Bond movie, which he always wanted to make. Yeah. Anyway, there's that.
it's James Bond. It's like Star Wars. You know what I mean? It's way more like I think I love Tim Burton's movie, but that's like Metropolis. That's like doing it like a very gothic version of
Fritz
like
Lang.
an old like silent movie version of like a comic book. This is how do we really adapt a comic book into the medium of film, and I think he went to like those great big like engrossing kind of like kids action movies. I think like Star Wars is all over this movie. I think the kind of
And so is Blade Runner. And
Blade Runner, visually for sure.
It's in there a lot too. We have to rate it. Sorry, Travis. We can talk more later. But I am curious to see how you guys are gonna rate this, because I feel like you guys really love Memento. I know, and I love it too. But I'm gonna put Batman Begins as number 1, and then Memento,
Hot take.
and then Insomnia, and then Following. Is that how we're doing it?
Yeah.
Is that how many there's been? Yeah.
Yep. Wow. I'm gonna again. Memento still number 1. This is the hot take here. I still have Insomnia actually over Batman Begins slightly. I think the reason
That's
is
cool.
it's just I don't have any real issues like fun. I never watch Insomnia. I'm like, oh, okay,
I love that.
But again, it's not to say Batman Begins is a bad movie. I think it's just about my own film going experience is uninterrupted. I think when I watch Insomnia. So
no, I love that. And you know how much I loved Insomnia this watch.
Yeah.
Like I was so fucking turned around on it.
100%, just like you, and I really like. I'm appreciate how much more I liked it the next most recent time I saw it.
If we were only going from this viewing, I enjoyed watching Insomnia more than Batman Begins, but that's just because I've seen Batman so many fucking times.
Right.
So it wasn't as like. Go
and
ahead. Travis.
Following, of course.
Oh wait, yeah, you got them all. Yeah.
Yep.
So I don't know. I think this movie again is super flawed. It's super clunky, but it also has like some of like the strongest images of any Christopher Nolan movie. And I am going to make one last point, which is the way he brings up the stethoscope a couple times. And again, that's the one thing that makes me think that maybe some of that repeating dialogue was Christopher Nolan, or like he was okay with it, or like he was trying to like, just doing it for like a mass audience, because he loves doing a shorthand thing to kind of bring you into the story. And when Bruce Wayne finds a couple times a stethoscope and it brings back these memories and you hear the twinkly music, that's pretty effective. And you'll see him like almost make a parody of that in Inception, right? With the like pinwheel. And I don't know. I think it's just such a beautiful, masterful story. Like I feel like you could watch it with just the score and no dialogue, and it would be just as good. Because of the performances and because of the filmmaking.
Maybe better.
At points, certainly better. I mean, there was like this montage when he's like, gassed up on pain, on fear, hallucinogens, where, it ends with the dad going, "Why do we fall?" And I'm like, that whole sequence would have been so much better with just out that line. But I guess my point is, I do love what I get out of this movie so much, and even though I think Memento is like a better movie, this is my number 1. So Batman Begins is my number 1. Memento is a very close number 2. I mean, perfect movie in my opinion, great movie. And then I guess very close together. I really enjoy both of them, but they're not kind of perfect to me. I don't know. Did I say Following Over?
You did
last time. I'll keep that. Following Over. What's it called?
That's insane, but okay.
Okay.
Insomnia.
Yeah, Insomnia. I'll keep Falling Over Insomnia just because I think it's more interesting and it's more it's got more heart. But they're both really excellent movies.
Right on.
Okay. All right, this is an awesome talk. I'm really glad that we were able to go long.
Kept it going for a couple hours. Yeah.
The extended edition.
Yeah. Someone out there
Right
is
on,
doing
guys.
push-ups and doing training and making themselves a better person. We're just frittering away our day talking about 20-year-old movies for a podcast that like 2 people in like Germany listen to.
Thanks, Germany.
So I hope you guys are happy. with your
Dankeschön.
life.
Right on,
Bye,
guys. We'll
film
see you next
friends.
week. Later, film
Yeah.
friends.
Bye,
See
guys.
ya.
Wait. Okay. Yeah. Let me stop my recording.
Thank you for listening to Auteur Detour. We'll see you again next week.